All right, so I'm going to actually read just a short introduction to the exhibition that I wrote, and then I'm going to introduce the other three artists who are here with me this evening, and then we'll kind of get into a conversation. And we're going to spend save a lot of time for you all to ask questions as well, so be kind of filing those away as we proceed. An incantation is an ancient technology, a spell, a charm, or an enchantment. A process or set of gestures imbued with a specific intention and designed to trigger an effect in the world. Personally, I find incantation to be a useful metaphor for the private performance of making art. This way of thinking about artistic process helps guide my selection of works for this show. All the artists in the exhibition work with rigorous and intensive processes and approaches to material. It seems to me that they are all playing with constraints and looking for the moment of freedom within those constraints, which is also how I describe my own approach to making art. As I stated in the wall text, Incantations grew out of my reflections on a body of work based on the winged beasts and flames of a 13th century English apocalypse manuscript. So that's the pieces in the corner in the front room there, which I painstakingly copied using pencil and ink, then cut up into diamond-shaped tiles and reconfigured. Piecing these tiles together, a process that connects to both quilting and collage, was where I was able to find that moment of freedom, and also to connect to my own intuition as I searched for and eventually discovered new forms and resonances latent within the troublesome source material itself. I was excited to curate this exhibition because it gave me an opportunity to place this body of work in dialogue with other works equally tactile, vulnerable, fragile, and queer. Okay, and so with that introduction, I'm going to introduce the three artists who are with me tonight. So we have R Kauff, Leeza Meksin, and Ajdin Kulić. And I'm going to go ahead and read short bios for each of them. R Kauff is a visual artist whose work pursues a crypt-time portal, a space where the body's present conditions are rendered as a source of knowledge and ecological position. Their drawing-based practice is informed by training in printmaking and sculpture and extends into images and objects animated by slow, accumulative mark-making. R received an MFA in printmaking and sculpture from the University of Iowa, and full disclosure, R is my partner. So we've known each other for a long time and have a very, I think, special relationship in terms of our knowledge of each other's work. It's pretty special. Leeza Meksin is an interdisciplinary artist working in painting, installation, public art, and multiples. Born in the former Soviet Union, she immigrated to the United States with her family in 1989. Her work investigates parallels between the gender conventions of painting, architecture, and our bodies. Leeza co-founded Ortega y Gasset Projects, which Jackie mentioned in my bio, an artist-run gallery in Brooklyn that she continues to co-direct, and we actually met for the first time in person recently after she curated some of my work into the wonderful exhibition currently on view there, which is called Painting Deconstructed. And I think we'll talk a little bit about painting tonight and some of the ideas that inspired that exhibition. Leeza is based in New York, but has family in Columbus, which is part of the reason she was able to join us this evening. So thank you for being here, Leeza. And finally, Ajdin Kulić. Ajdin is a multidisciplinary teaching artist and poet born in Akron, Ohio. Their work is grounded in personal research on the mind-body-spirit connection, trauma awareness, and guided by a poetic curiosity and an internal intergenerational history. Ajdin received their BFA in textiles at Kent State University and later worked for several years at Praxis Fiber Workshop here in Cleveland, which is where we met last year. And we're sitting in this corner because this includes work by these three artists. So this is Leeza's painting in the center of this wall here. This is Ajdin's woven tapestry behind us here, and these are ours super prints, which we'll talk about behind me. And of course my work's in the other room. So this seemed like the appropriate place to be, to have this conversation. And so to begin, I wanted to actually talk a little bit about media, the different kinds of media in the exhibition, which really span painting, sculpture, collage, printmaking, textiles, drawing, kind of across the board. And these three artists here with me tonight actually cover a lot of that territory. So I'm going to ask each of you a question related to the media that you're using, and then we'll kind of go from there. So I'm going to start with Leeza, actually. So as mentioned in your bio, you work with painting as well as a lot of other media. And I was wondering if you could talk about your specific connection to painting, especially given that you've just curated an exhibition focused on artists who are sort of pushing against the conventions of painting, and how it fits into your overall practice, and maybe situate the works that you have here, which are all paintings, or what I would call paintings.
Thank you.
Within that context.
I'm glad.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so this one's yours. There's also one behind Catherine in the corner here, and then one on the other wall there, so people know which work's there.
Thanks, Jen, and thank you everybody for being here, and to Zygote Press for hosting this exhibition. It's really a pleasure to be here and be part of this lovely show that I'm first seeing today in real life, but I saw pictures, and it's really nice to see all the work in person. So painting, I guess maybe I'll just start with saying painting, as maybe for many people, is a kind of entryway medium. It's available for anyone. You could paint, without a great setup. I think sometimes people feel like, oh, I need a huge studio, I need this or that, but really you could paint immediately, you could have your stuff anywhere, you could paint small. So I love that about the immediacy and the way that you could meet a very young person, you could meet a very old person who are painting, who love painting, for whom painting means something. And it's despite the rap that painting gets of being a kind of market darling, it actually is a very democratizing medium, because again, contrary to what a lot of times people say, like, you don't actually need any training to paint. And you see that vividly when you see children paint, and I love to witness that kind of immediate attack that children feel towards the paper or the canvas or whatever it is that they're working on. And I think for me, painting is something that I did from a very young age and loved, and maybe one of the few things that I felt like I excelled in, but I couldn't quite understand why or how, or if it's true, because people would say that I'm good at it, but I couldn't see it until much later. And actually, like, the whole idea of being good at it is something I definitely question, because as soon as I become comfortable in a certain technique, I no longer want to use it. It becomes boring or stale, or feels like you're not discovering anything, right? You're just sitting still. I feel like all the artists in the room are nodding, because that feeling, right? It's like you've found something that works, and it works for a while, but then it's no longer interesting or compelling, and I think, in painting, there are so many ways to improvise and to continuously push on the restraints of a painting, and kind of question what those restraints are. And maybe because as a medium it has a very long history, there's both a lot to know, but also kind of like, who cares? There's a lot out there, and you could just do, but I do personally as a teacher find that it's useful to know, but I don't think that it's necessary, in terms of like, who are the painters before you? So that's maybe just to address like what painting means to me, and why I continue to paint despite doing many other things that I'm curious about, like installations or work with textiles or prints. I mean, I love to make lots of different kinds of things and explore projects and ideas based or rather explore materials through different ideas that I might be having. So because of that, I never feel like I have to confine to a particular medium. And I realize that there's certain things you might lose by not kind of shooting at the same target, but I really like the kind of expansiveness that happens in the studio because I'm doing so many different things at once and they kind of cross-pollinate. And when I get tired of painting and feel like, is this even relevant today? Who is even looking at painting? I could turn and do something else. And so there are ways in which the different types of things that I do kind of cultivate each other and help to keep present. Because I think one of the worst things that artists experience, at least from my perspective, are those moments where you don't want to make things, and we call them a block or some kind of down period. But I think those periods are actually really important. But if I have different things that I could do to kind of reintroduce activity into the studio, then suddenly I find interest again. And I think that helps me to just kind of not sit for too long. I have to admit I do sit idly sometimes, but if it happens for too long, then it feels bad. So yeah, I think painting for me is a very, it's a medium that's full of potential and full of possibility. I really, I kind of think that it could include anything in and itself. I've seen paintings that have a video embedded in them, or paintings that are sculptures, or in fact, there's so many different types of painting now that break up these boundaries, that in itself is a testament to the fact that these boundaries are human made. We don't really need to keep going back to is this an object that is a painting or is it a sculpture? How important are these distinctions is something that I question a lot in the studio. So, and that's really what the show that I curated that Jen referenced, Painting Deconstructed, is all about. That the kind of the joy of just making and thinking about the tradition in a more playful, lighthearted way, as opposed to what's the genre,
Actually, a follow-up on that, related to that, is I was super curious. These are mostly the two small pieces that paper pulp. I found them, and I was curious about that, how you came to work with that material, and because it does feel like it's sort of pushing out of painting into a shallow relief sculpture or something. But
I'm trying to remember how I got into paper pulp. I think I was looking for a lightweight alternative because I was doing some casting that I would add to paintings, and they would add a lot of weight. So I was thinking of something more lightweight. But also I love, I had a curator stop by the studio who told me that, works on paper are kind of, the old notion that works on paper are the secondary works and they're not as important as works on canvas it was just an absurd thing. And I said, well, what about this painting that is mostly paper, because it's paper pulp? And he was really confused by it. He was just kind of you could tell, it was just something wasn't computing. Because he was saying that museums will not display any work on paper without protective glass. Yeah. And I was like, so what would happen with a painting like this? And he was like, I don't know, too much. So those are the kind of things that always both frustrate and amuse me, because paper is a multifaceted material. If we are just going to be okay, paper under glass, well, we're probably missing a lot.
Sure.
So I think that's kind of got me interested in paper pulp, and I started to make more work that combines more traditional painterly materials, such as oil paint and canvas, with something that you don't typically see in a painting.
Yeah, I love that. And it's also fiber, which is connects to Ajdin. I was curious if you could. So your works are all in textile or fiber, but you're using a lot of different techniques. Even in the 3 works that are in the show, so this piece is Ajdin's, but also the 2 small pieces in the corner, in the blue corner over there. Could you talk a little bit about fiber and textiles, what it means to you to be working in that medium, and also like talk a little bit about the techniques you're using to make these works that are here in the show?
I was kind of drawn to textiles initially just because I think there was something intriguing to me about it. Like, I think there was a gendered aspect to it that was intriguing, the way it's traditionally gendered as feminine. And also being a non-binary person, I felt that it was an opportunity to explore my identity in that way, and also kind of break conceptions, misconceptions, I should say, about like what textile gendered work is and who should create it and like where we derive meaning from it. And so, before I started getting into fiber, I was drawing a lot. I would draw in journal every day, and I also ventured a little bit into painting. And I found that, with that background, when I came into textiles, I was less interested in creating things that were like functional or, I think the way that we can think of textiles typically is like clothing and decorative things we keep in our homes or rugs, and those are all beautiful and artistic in and of themselves, but I think with my, my leeway being drawing and painting, I was curious about how I could push fiber mediums to create compositions and kind of replicate the ideas I wanted to get across in drawing and painting through textiles. I think the materiality of textiles and fiber were a really exciting aspect, and it also was like bringing things from 2D into 3D, but also still having them be 2D in one way. Like I feel like we interpret cloth as 2D, though it's an object, and you could argue it's also sculpture. And so yeah, what was the question?
Could you talk about like the specific, like the different techniques you're using? Because these are very different works, like the way you're making them is quite different. And people might not know, like how you did that, for example.
Oh yeah. So interestingly enough, this piece is separated from these 2 pieces. These 2 pieces behind us are handmade, and this piece is entirely digitally made. So I just digitally made. I'm trying to speak louder. I'm sorry. So this piece was entirely digitally made. The composition was created on Photoshop, and the weaving was done with a industrial jacquard loom, which is not human operated and is all machine woven, whereas those 2 pieces are handmade, weaving at the top, that there's a form of weaving called dimensional weaving, where you can kind of use certain materials and certain weaving techniques to create sculptural weaving works. And then the piece on the pedestal is all basketry techniques, so wrapping and coiling, wrapping with wool around cotton tubing. So, there's kind of a range of techniques here, and I finished this piece with crochet, so there's a little bit of handwork in here, but yeah, I kind of like thinking of fiber mediums, all the different ways you can create textiles as ways to create multi-layered experiences and also compositions that are not just one plane.
And so these pieces behind us we refer to these as super prints, right? Is that right?
Yeah, and sometimes I call them super prints. My friend Sophie, Sophie Isaac, is an amazing printmaker, who also is somebody who's interested in how like drawing and printmaking kind of can combine. Was calling things super prints for a while, meaning like a print that has a lot of drawing in it. So it's like more than a print. So trying to like elevate. I think it was a gesture of like trying to elevate the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I was curious about just that context, but also if you could talk about, well, your relationship to printmaking, because I know you have a deep relationship to printmaking and trained as a printmaker, and what that means to you, and also, to talk about like how you made these pieces, because I think that's really interesting. People can't necessarily tell by looking at them.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I just spent the last month in this print shop, and it was a huge privilege to be here every day and kind of see like all the huge variety of different projects that are going on, and like all the people that make this place run. So Zygote, it's incredible kind of resource. I've never seen a community shop that's kind of got this level of different mediums going on, and like the dedication to really keep these things strong. So more recently been doing a lot of printmaking, but my main practice is more drawing heavy. So I did all kinds of degrees in printmaking. I trained as a printmaker. I learned how to do most of the things you can do. And somewhere along the way, I acquired a chemical sensitivity to printmaking chemicals. So it's really common for, especially in institutional shops, they still haven't, many of them haven't upgraded to a less toxic way of cleaning things or of processing chemistry and various materials. And because there's a shared environment, so it's got this like little metaphor for like the problem we're all in right now. Like, you can't just be like, well, I will refrain from using the toxic chemicals and I'll be okay. You're just you're in the air, the same air that everyone's breathing. So at some point, I stopped being able to be in the print shops that I was near, and had to kind of figure out what my practice looked like when I wasn't in the shop. And so it was like a number of years where I still have the printmaking brain, but I'm not like just in the shop just making prints. So I developed this way of working that kind of started to fit into some of the kind of formal and conceptual things I was already working with in my work, where I was taking silkscreen stencils, so silkscreen is just a fancy stencil, and creating these kind of underlayers in my drawing, where so I'd silkscreen an image onto paper, but I do it with like white tempera paint. So basically, if you're printing it onto white paper, it's barely visible. And then as I'm drawing over the surface of the paper, that my inks are responding to this like almost invisible silkscreen layer. So in these drawings, like the silkscreen aspect is the text, and then the text is kind of got these interruptions of the patterns that are made over top of it. So in some of them it's quite legible, like you can read the individual letters, and then some of them it starts to fade, kind of depending on how my materials are responding to the ink. So this kind of process of like making, drawing, and printmaking started as kind of necessity, and then over the years I've really become interested in the ways that drawing becomes this way to talk to a structure. Like a printed image is a structure. It's made by a certain technology. Most of those technologies require flatness or the idea of a grid or a plane. Talk to any printmaker. Dimension is your enemy in most of our processes. And so I was kind of interested in a way like the drawing becomes like weird because it's my hand and it's not perfect, and like it starts to talk to this kind of more tight, kind of regular form that's underneath. And so I started to think of these as like ways of speaking to an image that can become kind of there or not there, depending on if I'm paying attention to it. So it's like perforated in a way. It's got like airflow, as opposed to like maybe the kind of print I might make where it's kind of traditional and whole. The image is uninterrupted and you're just asked to kind of passively receive all the parts of it. So it's unblemished, there's no barriers to my like kind of taking it in as a reality.
So, like, speaking of text, like, another kind of lens I thought might be interesting to look through at these works is through language, because there's actual text in the show, obviously, in R's work, and also Ikeler, the big painting, when you come in on the wall behind y'all, there has text actually in the piece. But there's also, I think the titles of the works, especially more abstract works, like are always a really interesting kind of access point or like way into kind of understanding a little bit more maybe where the artist is coming from or what questions they're asking in whatever visual language they're using. And Ajdin actually has a very special title for the piece behind us here that is. Ajdin is also a poet, so the title of that piece is actually a full poem, and we had talked about having you read that if you're still up for it.
I'm still up for it.
We'll kick off talking about titles and language by having Ajdin read the poem.
Cool. Okay. So I'd like to give a little bit of context before I read this. I wrote this in October when we all started, being witnesses to genocide in Palestine, and also that awareness being brought to other places around the world. Personally, I have a history, an intergenerational history. My parents are war survivors, and I come from genocide survivors. So in that time, I was struck by all these feelings that I never knew I could feel before, and I was reconnecting to my faith, which is Islam, and my family history in a way I never really had before, and that was something I've kind of always explored in my artwork because I inherited some PTSD with all of that. So in a venture to heal, I focused my artwork on that, and so this is kind of like, I prefer to call it like a channeling. It's something that I feel like was not necessarily from me, but kind of came through me as I was writing it. I would love to read that off for you, and I'm going to speak up so I can project a little bit better, or stand up.
Okay, and the poem is in the zine, so you can all take it.
All right. So the shortened title of this piece is called Hide Spine Align, but the entire poem is the title of the piece. So here we go. Hide spine align. My secret is my God, dissolving into cloth, disarming through faithful enchanting rhythms. I see it through my body unblocking, unfolding a story written between spaces and times, with threaded lines for the words we no longer have, subconscious names, shapes, and sounds. They are here for me when I am silent, unknown, alone, telepathia. I stay in and out of my body. I see in and out of you and me. I want to disappear, cave in, end of cycles. I want to crystal clear, to enter in eternity, washed away. That is the end of me, holographia. Mama, neću da sam živ. Mama, I don't want to live. I want you to live. I am a mirror resounding through carried memories, so when I hurt myself, I drown, I pool sorrow. Why is it I am dying when I only want to disappear from brutal realities we share? I will erase myself first, you cannot erase me. My body is my cloth to fold into holographic tears, a steward to the flowering ribbon inside, standing tide, intergenerative currents form new waves of resilience. Shine light in their eyes who are looking at the knots, blindfolded to the centers of deep webs, carrying these forests, waters, and fires from a core of life-giving patterns and rhythms, electric thoughts, messages, and memories, carrying on, holding us all brilliantly. The cloth is a life spelling out and resounding, stay alive, we are no sacrificial lamb, we are no human sacrifice. We choose to choose living this life, with no need for saviors, already holding powerful grace and gravity in our completion, fortified by growing, limmering inner strengths, activated by scripts illuminating from one source, Allah. Thank you. So another aspect of the poem for me is that, related to growing up Muslim and, being aware of my family history, I have also felt very disconnected from that growing up, being an American as well, and not really fitting into America or into Bosnia, and also being a queer person. I didn't really feel like I fit into my faith. So I kept thinking about erasure, not only of human life and generations of people, but also of loss of identity, the way we erase ourselves to protect ourselves. We erase ourselves to protect ourselves from judgments or ostracization. So erasure was an important topic for me to explore with that, as well as going off of this weaving. I purposely chose to, so this weaving is created with digital images of my body, covered and uncovered in cloth. And I purposely chose to hide my face in this weaving because traditionally in Islamic art you don't depict human figures. So that was one way for me to connect to faith, but also I felt like when you mask yourself, when you hide, you kind of do have a certain sense of freedom. Whereas I don't really have to worry about people interpreting me or being interpreted and having to go and live off of that interpretation. I found that erasure was an important part of this piece too, in many levels.
And kind of follow up about the imagery. So it's interesting you're talking about erasure because it also being so specific. I don't know, if you could talk about the symbols, are those invented or are you drawing from something? Yeah.
So interestingly, I created this piece in 2021 and I finished it this year. And when I first created it, I was interested in yoga at the time and somatic body work, which is a healing modality for PTSD and other traumatic stress related things. And I chose to represent 5 centers, energy centers along the body, along the spine, which are often referred to as chakras. There are 7 chakras. I just chose to represent this. And at the time I felt really connected to representing these symbols because I was developing a somatic practice, a body-based practice in my personal life that really helped me achieve health in a way I never experienced before. So I was connecting to my organs in a way I never felt before, both physically but also feeling that metaphysical energy contained in those areas of the body. So that was kind of why I chose to represent these centers of the body. And yeah, it was about, you know, but I feel like the reason why I also chose to present this in a digital format was because within textiles, it's really hard to achieve imagery such as this by hand. It takes a lot of labor and it takes a lot of expertise that, you know, it's not really possible as, I would say for myself, it's not possible as a solo artist. But because I had the opportunity to pick something so minutely, I decided to kind of create like this perfect image of alignment. Yeah, that was kind of one reason why I chose to.
Are they specific chakras? Like, did you choose 5 out of the 7?
They're not necessarily specifically related to the chakras. I feel that's an easy way to relate to it though, because we all kind of know a little bit about the chakras. But I was more interested in, because at the time I had a daily walking practice, so I really wanted to represent the feet and also that directional movement of like finding your inner direction and your inner compass, and the groin, or you know, the sacral area, because you know, I was uncovering parts of my gender identity and my sexuality, which were really heavily interlaced with my experiences of erasure, self-erasure, erasure from others, and also my process of self-discovery. And then, as well as the stomach or intestines, the digestive system, because as part of my holistic health journey was learning how to eat and actually learning how to take care of my body on a physical level. I think with PTSD and trauma-related responses, that is one thing that I still struggle with, is eating, having a healthy relationship to food, and also on that note, a lot of eating disorders are actually consequences of traumatic stress and intergenerational trauma. So that was one way for me to represent that healing relationship I'm building up towards with that. And as well as the heart being kind of this incredibly important center part of our bodies, where, you know, our lower energy centers and our higher energy centers meet there, and that's why there's a lot of, I would say, potent healing magic that comes from the heart. And the head, I think there's a lot you could say about that, but you know, I think ultimately, like, building up from bottom to top, when you meet at the crown, you kind of have this, you feel like you're shining, like you feel like you finally, it's like you're glowing to the rest of the world, in a healing sense. So that's kind of why I chose to represent those specifically, even though there are more chakras than that, and that's also why I don't necessarily call them chakras, but rather just energy centers, even though they're kind of related.
Thank you for expanding on that. Yeah, it's great to hear more background on the piece. And so this wall here is like the body wall. It's kind of how I thought about this part of the gallery. Leeza, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, so this is the painting that I thought of as your body painting. And then there's like a more sort of abstract work, and then there's a very architectural painting. And you talk about your work in the context of like the sort of parallels between these gender conventions in painting, architecture, and the body. So could you talk a little bit about, like, more specifically about the 3 works in the show? And I think this one's maybe an older work, or it's a long history?
It's the one that I started the longest time ago, but I finished this past year.
It had like a 20-year span. on
Yes,
that.
it's kind
I
of
was
crazy,
impressed.
the fact that it's a painting I started in grad school in 2007, and from studio to studio moved and tried it has many, many layers, and it just, you know, gave me a lot of issues, like I couldn't get to, and I would put it away and bring it out and put it away, and I don't like to throw away work, especially work that could be transformed into a totally unrelated work. You know, I see it as raw material, and as an immigrant, I'm not wasteful. I don't like to throw things away, even if they bother me, even if I'm like, this is staring failure in the face.
Yeah.
But I'll just put it away until I'm strong enough to see the failure again.
Yeah.
But yeah, then suddenly this past year in my Ithaca studio, I kind of saw it. I saw a way out of this place, and I kind of think of all of my paintings in terms of, in those three terms that you mentioned: the architectural, the bodily, and the painting as painting, because I think of the painting as a stand-in for the body, and I also think of it as a stand-in for a dwelling, because things live there, people live there, ideas live there. It's a world unto itself. It's a portal into another place. So when it works, it's an invitation to enter a space, and the composition and the texture and the colors are all architectural technologies, kind of going back to what you were saying, that help you enter the world. But then the body of the painting is also this kind of separate thing, right? It's both a body and a world unto itself. Just like all of the microbes in our body, think of our body as a world. So kind of like thinking of the micro-macro relationship. So maybe because of that, even though maybe that painting looks more abstract, I guess to me they're all somewhat abstract, but somewhat representational, because I feel like they all allude to things that are recognizable, and you could find things in them. So I really like that space between abstraction and representation, and you know, don't think that it needs to be one or the other. I think there's perfectly good reasons to combine them. So, you know, and that painting is called Gemini Light at Dawn and at Dusk, I think. It might be misquoting.
Yeah, that's right.
But I definitely thought of them as two towers. Two towers that are in a kind of flattened space, but are built up on top of each other. And also there's like a linguistic way in which I think about all the colors connecting to each other and creating almost like they're strung together like a sentence. So I think a lot about the architecture of buildings and the architecture of language and the parallels between those things. And in this painting, this is actually also a painting that took a long time and many iterations, not quite as long as that one. I think I started that one in like 2013 maybe. And it has like a spandex and zip tie basement, and then build up from there. So some paintings come very easily, like the one that's out there. That was a painting that I started and finished in 1 week. But that's not very typical for me. Like sometimes that works and that feels amazing, but that's not an expectation that I dare to have because it's very rare. Most things, there is a kind of, something happens and it needs to kind of age until I understand where it's leading me, because I don't actually ever sketch a painting ahead of time. What I do is in midway, because the beginning is always easy for me. Like I love starting paintings. I have like many paintings and that's beautiful, full of potential, unfinished, unburdened by anything. They're just lovely, but then you're like, but they're not done, so I have to finish it. And then in that finishing process, so many bad things happen.
Just ruin it, just like
Right,
that.
it's so easy to ruin it. So I think like making a lot of stuff is a kind of way to pace yourself, right? I'm like, I know something good is happening here. I'm gonna hide this from
Yes.
myself
Totally.
because I will finish it and it will die an ugly death. And but yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it just all clicks in a very kind of nice, unburdened way. But when it doesn't, it ends up being a process in the middle of which I often make drawings of the painting as a way to kind of unsee what I think I see and see something different. So I think of them as sort of portraits of the paintings, but then they oftentimes lead me to seeing what the painting is about because I don't really want to know ahead of time.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so I'm gonna ask one more question of R and then open it up for you all to ask questions. Just one other question about this work. We didn't really talk about the actual source text and like what that means to you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll be real short because I want to know. People want to know. Yeah, so these are all the same text. They just kind of starts in a different place each time. And the underlying text is it's taken from a fragment of Sappho, who wrote prolifically, and like most of which just arrived to our century in like fragments. And some translations try to kind of like piece it together into some kind of semantic thing. But Anne Carson, kind of famous translator, recent edition of translations of Sappho include all of the spaces where like we just don't have what was originally there. And I think of this book, like it's so incomplete if you open it. It's just like a bunch of like random words. And I'm not like a scholar of any of this, so I like opening it and just letting like the little fragments walk through my life. And so this is a fragment from that text. It's, if you were to read it, it would say, for as long as you want. In the drawings, it just repeats itself endlessly. And in the original Greek, it's written without spaces, which I kind of love. It's like this, it's just like endless material. And so I was thinking a lot about kind of this anxiety about future, but also kind of this like, for the show here, like an incantation is kind of this desire, this wish, and so for me this is like a wish for the right amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe.
Yeah, I think we'll stop. I won't talk so much now, but I'm sure you all may have some questions. So and also if any of you have questions for any other, we can kind of just see what happens now. Yes, Jan.
Yes, I've heard the panelists talk in depth about their work. And one of the things I would like to hear about more detail is the source for your work
Yeah.
and how you have deconstructed and reconstructed.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. So I mentioned it's the source for this it's a large body of work that I actually made most of it in Los Angeles, which is where I was living before coming to Cleveland. And the source is it's a 13th century English apocalypse manuscript, which from the collection of the Getty Museum in LA. So I encountered it in LA and kind of became obsessed with the images. There's like 82 illustrations in this book. And in the 13th century in England, apocalypse manuscripts were like all the rage. It was like this very popular art form, kind of like a comic book. I mean, that's how it related. I kind of related to it as like this is a 13th century comic book, but it's like telling the story of the Book of Revelation. So it's this, which I didn't really know anything about. I wasn't raised, going to church or anything. Like I didn't. It was just the images that that I became compelled by, and they're really crazy. Like they're the scenes are just wild. It's like a surrealist comic book, basically. And I sat with it for a few years not knowing what to do with it. But living in LA is kind of like actually physically experiencing apocalyptic climate change. And so I finally realized I needed to do something with this material. Because when I moved to LA, I felt like in my body I experienced like physically, like the situation we're in, ecologically, in a way that I had intellectually understood, you know, for many years, and had read a lot about, and had been in reading groups, and you know, kind of trying to intellectually process. But it was like, okay, this is physically happening in my body. And so so what I decided to do was take that material, those images, which I was so drawn to, that tell this story that, in a lot of ways, like the way I started to think about the source was like, oh, it's this narrative that we've kind of inherited in the modern West, at least, like whether or not we have a direct relationship to the Book of Revelation or Christianity. It's an underlying narrative that like permeates Hollywood films and, you know, basically popular culture and the way that we think about time and like inevitability of certain things. And so I wanted to like take that story and make it physical with my own hands, and and then to manipulate it or change it in some way to like. I mean, I was thinking a lot about like the sort of linear time in that story, and so what I ended up doing was, you know, sort of communing with the material, copying it very carefully, and then cutting it up into these diamonds so that it could be completely just spun around and become this kind of nonlinear structure, essentially. So that is what I did, and it was kind of an obsessive, crazy process that I engaged in for a few years, and created a large body of work. And I hadn't really shown it before, and so when I was thinking about this project, before I knew I was going to be curating a group show at Zygote, I was applying for a grant, satellite fund grant. Over a year ago, I finally sat down and wrote about it, and then kind of, hopefully that addresses your question, but just to like kind of elaborate further on how that sort of led to this show is that I partnered with Zygote, and they encouraged me to bring in other artists, and then I thought, okay, yeah, that actually feels like it would be really exciting to kind of just like take all the reflections I've done on writing about this body of work and understanding the importance of the sort of process, the ritualistic process that I was engaging with, to transform that material or kind of take it through my body, to find something else on the other side of that. Like what other artists, you know, what works would I like to put that in dialogue with, essentially. And it really kind of spun into this whole other, you know, I never would have been able to anticipate what that would lead to, but that's kind of how the show came about.
Can I ask, I'm curious, are those two of a larger group then?
Yeah, so the very large painting, there's a few of that size. And then I made those two smaller ones for this show, so there's a newer ones. But there's other small works as well. Yeah.
Because it sounded like you had a lot of material to work with from this book.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, there's still plenty more that I can
Yeah.
work with. Yeah, but I've paused on making that work. To kind of like Leeza, I'm like, got my hands in a lot of pots, and I have to sort of like put things away so my studio is not that big, and sort of focus on one type of technique or approach at a time. Yeah.
And what you said you copied the source, do you mean like copied by hand or photocopied? Or?
Copied by hand, yeah, so that's a good question. No, so I actually gridded it out. I like use like a very traditional sort of method for scaling it up. Like putting a grid on the source material, then gridding my paper. So it's ink on paper. and like pencil drawing the whole thing. Like I felt like I wanted to actually, in certain ways, be very true to the source, or to like really understand it and see it and know what it was. Kind of like you were saying, drawing your own paintings. Like until you draw something or look at it really closely, like, you don't really see it. And that's my experience. And so yeah, it was a copying by hand.
I would say they were like full painting, drawing. They were beautiful. It's
I
probably
guess,
not.
like,
It's
yeah.
probably not okay for me to say. Like a lot of
No,
floss.
this is totally great.
She went and like just cut everything out. I was like, but that was my favorite one.
Well, it's true.
Did you save at least one?
I do have a couple,
Okay.
but that's partly why I stopped making that work. It was a hard process to go through actually, because I was destroying something I spent a long time on, but I was making something else, and that was the conceptual sort of process.
I did a lot of work with medieval studies, languages and things, and one of the things that fascinates me is that in any era, people can create kind of a picture of reality as they experience it, without really appreciating a lot of the pieces and angles and stuff, other stuff that's going on in there, because they're thinking of it as a whole. And, putting stuff together unconsciously almost from their daily lives. So you go in there and cut it all up again, and find things
Yeah.
that they would not have realized were in there.
Well, that's exactly it, and that's what I was trying to get at in that little piece of writing, is that it was like the process of collaging it back together made it worth it to destroy the initial painting, because the sort of joy of discovering these kind of movements or like connections through these fragments was what really, that was really what got me going with it.
There's so much that we take for granted in our own depictions of now, or of our own experiences. And it's like imagine somebody else coming along hundreds of years later and looking at something made about this year,
Yeah.
what it's like. And they would find stuff there that we hadn't been aware of. We were even putting it.
That kind of goes, I'm sorry, I just want to quickly jump on that bandwagon, because I'm really interested in this idea that you were talking about also of that there are certain things that are invisible in the present moment, or that are maybe less valuable, right? Like maybe they're visible but are not valued by a certain society at the time. And then, the way that you kind of destroy to reconstruct also mirrors like a common building practice, right? Like many churches are built on sites of ancient temples, and it's like the reusing of even like the pyramids. They strip the top layer and we're reusing it elsewhere. The fact that it was a grand pyramid did not seem to make them feel differently about that material. So I didn't really appreciate that part of them before, that you're really creating something and then destroying it. And I think there is this kind of architectural aspect to that that's really interesting. They're like building blocks.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like it's when I talk to people about it, they always seem to get it more than when I try to just write about it. It's something I'm still trying to figure out how to communicate about. Because when you look at an image, especially on the computer, a JPEG, it's like you can't tell all what's going on. But the physical material and the physical process is so important to me when I feel that. Question?
Well, Luno, do you feel a higher, less apocalyptic than California?
Wait, say that again?
Do you feel that the higher is less apocalyptic than California?
Ohio? Well, I don't know. This week, I'm not sure. But I definitely don't feel it in my body every day in the way that. It was pretty frequent.
I mean, intellectually, like we're all in like political apocalypse, like, and then apocalypse is like definitely localized to everyone's position and their locality, but like you feel like you're in. I felt like I was in a movie in LA.
Yeah.
I was like, this is a movie about the apocalypse, and I'm in it.
Oh, this is a movie for sure. We're all in the movie.
We're all in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ohio's less cinematic.
Less cinematic. There's less drama. Yeah. Are there any other questions? Sarah. Yeah.
I am very interested in the relationship with the picture plane in a lot of these works. There's obviously like a depth in it, but I feel that depth more in like the texture and like the treatment of material. So I guess I was just wondering if that like the first moment that I walked into the show, I was like, oh my god, like it all just works together so beautifully. And I don't know where my question is, but I just maybe if anyone is interested, like speaking about a relationship to like the picture plane, and then maybe how that relates to this idea of incantations, which is very like present and like forward moving. I feel.
I love that question.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Yeah. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think with texture, I don't know if this is an answer, but it's kind of along the same lines of the question. With texture, I feel like, as opposed to our sense of vision, we, whether it's our imaginary sense of touch or our literal sense of touch, there's like something about the physical sense of touch that is more, it's more like a, universal mother or something that I feel like, pushing from picture plane to with texture is kind of like, it's kind of like inviting I don't know if this is gonna come across correctly, but kind of like inviting mother and father to sit together or something, and your sense of vision and your sense of touch coming together.
I like that.
And yeah, that's kind of how I related to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a curatorial perspective, very intuitive for sure. That's my mode. So it often is hard for me to have words that make sense for a long time. But my own work, there's, especially the big painting, there's a kind of illusion of dimensionality because of that pattern. That I think was a starting point for sort of thinking about it, which I think has something related to what you were saying. There's it's like a flat plane, and you know that looking at it, but you're also, there's a pleasure in giving over to the illusion, I think. And when I started selecting works, I did notice that there was a density, material density to what I was drawn to be in relationship with that. And I think someone used the word thick at the opening to describe the show, it's thick. I was like, yeah, that seems right. But it was really a sort of intuitive process to bring it all together. So that might not help at all.
I have a question for Dawn. Kind of for you too, Jen. I was curious, how did you consider using the text, which was already fragmented as we received it, and kind of creating your own translation? How did you think about creating legibility versus illegibility of the text? Do you want us to read it as a straightforward text, or do you how do you interpret that? And same for you, Jen, in that original painting. deconstructing it, and then how do you consider like the legibility of that past painting or the illegibility?
Yeah, that's a good question. Did you all hear the question?
Yeah, that question, like, so like, how important is it that it be legible, like that you can read it and understand it, versus like it just being like texture, like suggestion of text? Yeah, it's like a really interesting question, because I think that I'm always trying to figure out where my sweet spot is in that. And for these, it was, I think of it as like we like to read. I like to read. I can't not read if there's text. I can't not read. There is a point at which I'll like give up. And so I'm always aiming for like, I don't want anyone to like totally give up. But I'm okay with it being like hard and slow, and like also I'm okay with some people giving up. And I think as an artist, like you get this, if you're in a show, you get like this, you get a title, so that helps. But for me, it's like more about, the phrase gets like, becomes spatialized. And so it becoming like, and it repeats. And so if you're a dedicated reader, you can see that it's there and you can slowly read it. And even just like the process of stenciling it out when I'm doing individual letters, or sometimes I'm laying it out, like when I slow it down, it does this like strange thing for me where there's like a pleasure in weird line breaks where, you know, like the text becomes something, reads like something else, and like every once in a while it's funny because it like accidentally spells like gas or something, or like there's something about like that it's like the language becomes loose. And it becomes like when you have to think about it, your body's a little more involved. And so I think I'm like really interested in that kind of intentional obstruction. Thick, like viscosity, viscous,
It's plastic.
kind of
Plastic. I think E. Ikeler, who made the text-based painting, talks about their work in terms of like a relationship between the plasticity of painting and language. And like, that piece is called "Everything Will Change," but if you first see it, like when I watch someone read it at first, they read it in a different order, or you know, it's because it's not linear. And I get to answer your question, I feel like I specifically include elements that are recognizable, like there's little heads and arms, because that's kind of like a nice entry point. But I was really committed to like making the source illegible in a way, like to transform it into something else. But it's something I've been thinking a lot about more recently. Is I feel like for like the last decade, I've spent a lot of time hiding things in my work, and like really hiding them so that almost no one can find them. And I am experimenting right now with like, what if I let it all out a little bit more and reveal some of the imagery, or like, you know, so that's happening, but TBD.
I think the fact that with those, the fact that the wording begins in a different place every time is really important, because if it was simply the same text 6 times, even though you did everything else with colors and textures and other little graphics, it would pretty quickly strike you as, oh, I see what this says. But I find that I go back to it again and again and again, and every time it starts out with gibberish. I think, wait a minute, what is that? It's like these letters are scrambled, like it doesn't really spell anything. And then a word pops out. And it was very interesting to me that the word that kept popping out for me was want. And I thought, I wonder if anybody else has a different experience or the same. And then it's funny, as you mentioned gas before, I think, yeah, there are things that also make you smile. But it keeps drawing you back because it's like you never completely, master it.
Yeah, you wanna see what else is there. There's, you know,
That's a good
Like,
thing.
it's not finished. My sense of what's there is not finished. There's more going on than I've seen yet.
So maybe like
The invitation.
one more question, if there's one more, and if there's not, that's okay. Yeah.
I want to thank everybody for inviting me here. I'm excited about this wonderful recommendation of the source and here. Actually, I'm that is my Google's here company, and every time when I work, I get a second like holistic art, and because I understand for when you're healing people, you have to understand what you're feeling, how you can express his feeling. If you want to make people, like I work with older people, after 60, 70, 80, and every time when I come, my job, like, explain people, we still have to be happy, we still have to believe in the moment, and help me understand how beautiful when he do something, like painting, or sculpture, or jewelry, or whatever he can do, express his feeling. Then older people start to be then more clean in his feelings and more clear what he understand. And nobody will hear him because it's older age, but we don't hear what kids say, and we don't hear what people whose age, we just ignore it. But actually what kids say and people whose age say this is important because this is as clean and clear from emotional bada. And what I want to say about Leeza Meksin, I know her from youngest, and actually I grew up, auntie. And I love how she's pure, how she's react, how she feel power, how she feel life, how she feel everything. And it touched me, let me stand up like my life. Because me encountered when I was 38, and I was young kids. And I understand, art in my head. But at the same time, I understand this is important part. We keep everything what we bring from beauty and from Russia, from Uzbekistan, from Ukraine, with my mom from, and like I'm survived from the historical, and what we feel, we don't have a time to explain. Now, when everything is a little bit better, I wanna, and this is, Leeza's art helped me. And we should have said, oh, I remember this, like your art. I said, oh, I remember this. When I was young, we played in school. Like we painted this, we made a mix. It was amazing. Like now, piece of this art reminds me something. And I thank everybody. Paint it, don't stop, just be happy. Like
Thank you. That's a great ending point.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. And we'll, I think, be here for a few more minutes if you want to ask more questions of us.
So great to hear. She's a healer. She's a total healer. And she's actually, she does these exercises that she doesn't consider them art. And she draws very methodically when she's going through emotional, just going through emotions. And she kind of creates these organizational systems that help her process her emotions. And she told me about it, and I was like, that's some real good art though. And she's like, no, this is not important. Like, but yeah, I feel very proud to be her. She's very, I feel like she understands what you were saying. If I could guess, because that's probably what gave her courage to speak up, because she understood that we care about healing and thinking about it, so. That was wonderful. You did a great job. You're so good. Yeah, there was such such good questions, and I learned so much about each of her practices. It was really lovely.
Was she MFA?
And I actually love her music, and a lot of these groups, I feel like there's such a range. From, you know, in just media, but also experience, like the reasons for making the work all about. Yeah, it's really nice.
Thank you. So glad you
Yeah, and I think the show is really beautiful, like all together, just such a, you can feel it, just like an energy, and I can feel it commenting on